So, the problem of personal identity in the self, or rather, the self merely as personal identity. The key term here being merely as, right? This is a wholly different view, right? It's the view that we get with Sartre, and it does have within itself some problems, right? Um, the big one being if there is no substantial self, no essential self that I am, right? How is it that we can talk about continuity of the self, sameness of the self over time? Right? Because for something to be the same, it must be completely identical with itself, right? For A to equal B, B can have no features more, less, or different than what A does. So how do we talk about me being the same person or you being the same person on this basis of personal identity, right? How do we talk about the self in this way? Well, according to um, uh, uh, most, almost universally, almost universally, uh, all the theories on personal identity or self as personal identity, it comes down to functionally this one aspect, which is the immunity from error through misidentification, right, theory, right, or IEM theory. It's the idea that whatever else goes into being uh, me or you, right, towards the self, towards being a self. What absolutely irrevocably is true is I cannot confuse myself for being someone else. Right? Even when you look at people with multiple personalities, right? Those multiple personalities never, or multiple identities, never misidentify themselves as being one of the other identities. Right? So I can't misidentify myself. I know that I am me, and it's that self-awareness that is uh, crucial to resolving this tension between the self and personal identity, right? They aren't exactly the same thing, but uh, they are near enough identical, I suppose. It's not the best way of putting it, but it's what I have. All right. Uh, but personal identity does raise its own questions or issues. Right? There's the question. The question of personal identity is what makes me me and not you or someone else, right? What separates me from everyone else, right? And again, this idea of IEM, right? Identity or immunity from error through misidentification, uh, plays a central role in this. Right? Now, broadly speaking, there are in the contemporary literature two major theories of self as personal identity within this, within contemporary literature. First one is called the fictionalist theory of self, or the fictionalist theory of identity, and it's a reductionist theory, right, which says that your personal identity, who you are, can be reduced down to this, right? And it's no more and no less than these things. Um, Now, the fictionalist theory of self says that we simply are our brain activity. Nothing more, nothing less. Right? Neurons fire in the brain, and we are just the firing of our neurons. All of our experiences can be parsed down and fully reduced to just that neural activity, including who we are. Our experience of self is nothing more than that. The other side of this is, or the other theory, is what's called the narrative theory of identity, or narrative theory of self, right? And this is a constructive or constitutive theory of identity, right? The reason it's called narrative theory is because it says that we are the stories that we tell ourselves, right? This, again, you can see this with Sartre. We are the stories that we tell ourselves. So while those stories might come from brain activity, the experiences might be, the individual experiences might be reducible to brain activity. Their sum total is something more than what's just in the brain, right? It is the stories we create about our lives, about who we are, right? So the narratives we construct are not just brain activity, right? There's an element of self-involvement in narration that the brain just isn't capable of, but that is there in our experience. And so this is a case of the sum is more than its parts. That's basically what the constitutive theory of identity, or the narrative theory of self, is. A more concrete version of this, right? Basically like a subset of the larger category of narrative theory of identity, of self, is the memory theory of self, right? The memory theory is basically, it's older than the narrative theory, but it's what you might call the paterfamilias, right? The head of the lineage that led to the narrative theory. And it's still, in some versions of it are still used as part of like contemporary modern versions of narrative theory of identity. And it says that the most basic unit of self is our memories, right? Because memories provide the most basic unit of information for crafting the narratives that we have. So we don't really have a personal identity until we have enough memories to create one, right? We might have a personality, but without memory, we can't have identity, right? That's sort of the idea. A good way of thinking about this is look at someone with like dementia, right? Like severe dementia, where they have age regression, regressive, where their age regression is involved, right? So they go to sleep one night, 83 years old, or let's say 96 years old, full life of memories, and they wake up the next morning with only the memories up to the age of 16 in a body that's 96, right? So functionally, they have what, 1/6 of their life experience, right? Their memories have been cut off from them, right? And of course, if all they have are their 16-year-old memories, or their memories up to age 16, the narrative is going to be that of their 16-year-old self, right? Those memories are going to have the most prominence, where, a lifetime of experience afterwards, for their 96-year-old self would mean that other things have more prominence, right? And so their identity shifts with the lack of memories, because the narrative shifts, and therefore the narrative shifts. Make sense? Okay.